My name's Nikki Ingham, and I have the best job as the Exec Director for the Healthcare People Management Association, which our prime aim is to support people to achieve the best they can as workforce professionals in the broadest sense, to ultimately then impact on patients, service users, families, carers and staff. So it's a real pleasure to run this event today on HR apprenticeships, and obviously we will potentially talk about apprenticeships generally, but our focus is really how we get more HR apprenticeships into the system, and how we utilise that flexibility, which Simon and Ian will talk about. So a warm welcome to Simon. Simon's from Avado. He'll introduce himself in a moment, and we've also got Ian Mond, who's from the CIPD. So Simon, do you just want to introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, hi, morning everybody. What my job? I'm Director of Government and Public Services at Avado. I think they used to call me Civil Service Simon, but we go a bit broader than just government at the moment. And my job is really the success of all of our partnerships across the public sector into central government, into local government, and perhaps most exciting opportunity for us, I guess, is into healthcare as well. So it's a really challenging but equally really exciting time for the health service. So I'm really happy to be here.
Thanks, Simon. And Ian, do you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Ian Mond, I work for what's called the Employer Solutions part of the CIPD, which really looks at how we interact with organisations, large companies, both in the public and private sector, with the view of helping them to professionalise their HR functions. And we're doing a lot of work now in the public sector, particularly across the whole of civil service. And we're just starting to do a piece of work across the NHS. Some of you may have been involved in an assessment tool that recently went out to quite a number of people across the NHS to look at assessing how you're viewed by not just internally but by the business as well. And then we're working with the NHS to look at what does that mean going forward in terms of HR professionalisation. And of course a key element of that is the apprenticeship.
Great, thanks Ian. So just a few ground rules before we start, because we are utilising Zoom today, which is a very intuitive platform. Obviously there's only Lucy and Vicky who are brave enough to put their cameras on, which is great. It would be helpful. I know that there are some things around bandwidth about when you put your video on, he sometimes drops out, but if you can put your camera on, that's really helpful for us to be able to interact with you and see your beautiful faces. Hi Will, nice to see you. That's really helpful for us to be able to engage with you more proactively. And clearly if you ask a question, I would want you to put your camera on if you can. Hi Lucy. There you go. A few of you have been a bit braver now. That's good. Nice to see faces rather than just black screen. So good. So we have got the chat facility. Please feel free to use the chat. I'll be monitoring the chat as the chair of this event today. If you've got any comments, any questions that perhaps arise from the presentations we're about to hear, then put them in there. I will potentially invite you in to speak. So again, we can hear your voice in the room. Would be helpful as well. The dogs are barking again. There you go. So I've forgotten what I was going to say now. So we will be recording, and we've started recording the session, and that's really for our members only area on our website, so that people perhaps who couldn't be able to make it today can go and have a look at what we talked about today, which is really helpful. So Jo is our back, she's like behind the scenes making sure all the technology works, so huge thanks to Jo. Jo is our exec assistant for HPMA. She basically runs the charity, and I just pitch up when she wants me to. She's your lady if you need anything. So it's exciting times in the NHS, but also quite challenging times, and I personally would like to thank each and every one of you for everything that you're doing and have done during the pandemic and before pandemic, because there was a world before pandemic. I remember it well. I used to be able to go out, get my hair cut, those types of things. You are doing an amazing job in very difficult circumstances, and I mean this really genuinely from me. It wouldn't be for you that my parents have had their COVID jab. I've had mine, my husband's had his. You've worked really tirelessly, often unseen because you're behind the scenes. So what you do every single day is really benefiting patients and the population. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. So exciting times for the profession. As Ian mentioned, we've got the national review, which has had mixed response, it's fair to say, but the HPMA as a charity are very heavily involved in that national review, and we are helping to shape particularly the professional development aspects. So Ian mentioned about the profession, is it professional? He'll talk about that a bit later. I think we've got a role to play in how we sort of utilise the platform of COVID, where we've become more visible, where we've become more, I suppose our role is clearer. We need to build on that going forward. So it's a really exciting time. I had a conversation with Simon, and we were introduced by another colleague. Networking is the name of the game, I would say. And we had an interesting conversation about apprenticeships generally, but then about HR apprenticeships. And I felt it'd be really helpful to share with the membership what is available, what we can do, but also the CIPD profession map, because that is changing, and Ian will talk about that. Okay, so there's more got the cameras on, but people keep putting them off, so they're obviously very shy. Hopefully you won't be shy when it comes to the questions. So we're going to hear from Simon and Ian, presentation, so a bit of input. Then we're going to have a little panel discussion in terms of questions that arise for me that I will put to Simon and Ian, and then we will open it up to the floor. So get your questions ready, put them in the chat if you wish, and I will come to you and ask for those. Okay, if you need to go and have a natural break, get yourself another drink, feel free, but please come back. Don't just log off and not come back. That's what we like. So I'll pass over to Simon and Joe, who's going to put the slides up for us, and then we'll take it from there. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much, Nikki, and just echo your sentiment of thanks, really. And I guess I hope that everybody will get something out of today's session and learn a bit. You know, Avado is a learning business, and so hopefully I won't be sharing too much stuff that you already know, and you'll be able to get out of this session what you want to. So a bit of background about me, really. I live up in the Northwest, so it's good to see somebody from WWL here today. I'm Vicky, I can see you got your camera on, so not far from me, just around the corner, really, I'll bet. And I've been working for our company, Avado. Our apprenticeship brand is called Arch. You may have heard of Arch. For nearly 5 years now, and the big chunk of that time I've spent working with the UK government in the rollout of its HR apprenticeship programme. And I don't mean this at all in a showy off way. I just but I've probably been involved in more enrolments of HR apprenticeships than anybody else in the country. Okay, and like I said, that's not, but it's about my experience, really. So I'm not going to be telling you about Avado, how we do things, or anything like that. Obviously, if that comes up in the questions, I'm happy to do that, but that's not the purpose today. But we've been on working with Ian and his colleagues and folks in civil service HR for 3.5, nearly 4 years now, and we've learned a lot along the way. And that's the sort of discussion which I had with Nikki, and what I thought would be most useful to share with you guys today. Okay, so that's going to be the purpose. If you can just flick through, I'm going to play Chris Whitty. So next slide, please, Joanne. I've always wanted to say that, so I get to do that today. So I'm going to start off with a different angle on the apprenticeship levy. So I'll be talking about the why of the apprenticeship levy, and not the what. Okay, so hopefully you'll find that useful. Then all 25 or so of you have the absolute privilege of being the first people to see a couple of new trendy slides that I had produced just for this session. So hopefully they work and that they're useful and you like them. And one of those is around the structure and value of apprenticeships. And the second one is around the input of line managers, because those are the two things I think that we have learnt at our business in how to make apprenticeships successful. It's what that input of line managers and the role of the employer in those, but also from the very beginning, making sure that everybody involved truly understands the structure and purpose of apprenticeships. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that today. And those two link into just really my thoughts at the end, really, were no slides, but I'll just talk about what I mean by getting the why right, and hopefully you'll find that you'll find that helpful as you're framing HR apprenticeships for whatever priorities, objectives that you have. Okay, I'm also going to, I see the chat's come through that. I'm also going to try to make this a little bit interactive. Okay, so there's a reasonably sort of intimate number of us, not several hundred. So I'm going to ask for a bit of involvement in this as well, if that's okay. All right. So next slide, please, Joe. Thanks very much. Okay. So before we click through, obviously we all should know what the apprenticeship levy is. It's a tax on large employers to fund the delivery of apprenticeships. But I'm interested in understanding your understanding of why the apprenticeship levy exists. Okay, so feel free to take yourself off mute and speak out, or in the chat. I want to hear from you what you think the why of the apprenticeship levy is or was. Okay, really important. This is the bit where I really need you to participate. I'm just left hanging. Okay.
Feel free to put your hand up if you want.
Yeah,
to
hand up or chat or
chat.
blurt out. Anything in that.
So you can find your hand in the reactions button at the bottom of your screen.
Yeah.
So we've had
okay, great. Encourage organizations develop, give employers more control. Interesting. Increase supply of skills tailored to employers' needs. Okay. Encourage organizations to employ apprentices. Okay, what else have we got? Develop staff in the profession, develop staff, government target, Amanda. Yeah, we all love 2.3%, wherever that number came from, right? Allow staff to learn on the job. Okay, right. Okay, those are all interesting and sort of right, I guess. Interestingly, Joe, if you could flick through, lots of people in this say about getting young. No, just go. Leave it there. Leave it there. Just fine. So interesting. Lots of people tend to say about young people and bringing talent into organisations. But actually, as well as the obvious for me, which is the government leaning on large employers to help foot the bill for the delivery of apprenticeship programmes, as well as that, it was in response to the UK's position at the time on where it ranked in the developed nations of how much its major employers invest in training their existing workforce. Okay, so the apprenticeship levy was in part brought in to address that. So the UK employers were not spending enough training their existing staff. So in the context of new ways of working, evolving technologies, all of that, they said, right, hold on a minute, we're going to need to take our workforce as it is and invest in them to keep up with the rest of the world, really. And so the apprenticeship levy was decided to be one of the vehicles to do that. And really interesting that the skills agenda through lots of the FE sort of initiatives going on at the moment is then going on to the next level, if you like. And I think the apprenticeship levy was the kickstart to that sort of 3 or 4 years ago. Okay, so with that important change in sort of legislation, that why came 2 really significant changes in the world of apprenticeships. Okay, many of you will already know this, but I think it's really important to give that context. The first change became the type of apprenticeships. Okay, apprenticeships used to be called frameworks, and they're now called standards. And for me, the single biggest difference is that really on a framework, that you would do some training and then you have a job at the end of it. That's what apprenticeships pretty much used to be like, and certainly that's what people think apprenticeships are. But nowadays, apprenticeships are that you are doing a job, whoever you are, and you do some training that makes you better at that job. Okay, and they're called standards deliberately because it's about taking the person who's doing any apprenticeship, okay, it doesn't matter if it's an HR apprenticeship or beekeeping or anything like that, takes them from where they are now and raises the bar of their occupational competence and what they do to reach a standard of work that they weren't at before. Okay, and that's basically the structure of apprenticeships. And the other key thing in this is that gone are the days where external consultants or training providers set what those standards are. The employers, because they're footing the bill now through the apprenticeship levy, the employers are the people who set the standards, who write them, come together as trailblazer groups. Some of you may even sit on some of those. And those groups come together around a table and say, you know, if Carlsberg did HR business partners, what would they be like? Okay, It's not quite that question that they ask, but that's essentially what employers are setting that bar, setting that standard that they want people to be working towards. So that's just what I mean by employer-led qualifications. If you flick through, Joe, the next biggest change then was about the who can do an apprenticeship. So just because obviously with that's fine. Obviously with apprenticeships now targeted at existing staff, a lot of the previous restrictions and funding incentives around young people have basically gone. And there are still a few that remain in terms of what prior learning and experience that you've got. And oftentimes that can be subjective and quite difficult to grasp. But really, now anybody, I bet anybody on this call could do an apprenticeship of some type, some sort of learning. And so if you put all of that together, so that's the funding existing through the apprenticeship levy, more robust, holistic, fit for purpose, employer-led training programs, open with a net a lot wider in terms of who can do apprenticeships. That's why apprenticeships, and there's difference between an apprentice and an apprenticeship, are nowadays more and more recognize this year by year, much more recognized now by employers as a new route to qualification and professionalization or increased capability in the workforce. Okay, so that's my first thing on just the why of the apprenticeship levy, and I think it gives useful context. Okay, Joe, if you can flick through, I'm going to talk about the structure of an apprenticeship and one of the key things that I've learned. So here's our apprentice in the middle with my new trendy slide for this. So as I said before, apprenticeships are, I just love apprenticeships, okay? I wish I did one, frankly. Did a degree, didn't enjoy it, wasn't right for me. Much preferred getting a job, okay? And apprenticeships mix that, as it says here, that structured learning with the opportunity to show off and evidence that you're meeting those standards through your job, okay? And if you just look carefully here at the slide, you'll see this arrow and there's the different shades around that sort of circle around that. And we're going to focus on that because I think it's a really important thing that people understand what makes up an apprenticeship. So if you flick through, Joe, one of the rules around apprenticeship levy funding, of course, it's public money, so it comes with all sorts of bureaucracy and red tape and things like that, is that people have to be given 20% of their time learning, okay? And what's called off-the-job training. And that's there for a reason, because it forces that new learning of new skills and things like that that the apprenticeship is there for. But it often is the biggest barrier to us to success in apprenticeships, because people think that they lose people for 20% of their time, they lose productivity, it has an impact in that sense. And they also think that the 20% of their working day is the beginning and start of their apprenticeship. And in fact, I won't name who, of course, but last month it was National Apprenticeship Week, and I attended a session, and one of the HR directors of major government department talked about people doing apprenticeships, and then when they come back to their job after they've been doing their apprenticeship, and it just showed a misunderstanding of that structure of apprenticeships that is still there. So really important that I hope I can share my insight into that. If you flick through, Joe, one of the key elements of apprenticeship programs is the involvement of a coach. So in the world of L&D, we're starting to see a shift towards things being more about skills and embedding those skills in the workforce. So not just apprenticeships, across the whole piece. And coaching is a huge thing now for L&D teams in the sort of large sort of global organizations, or any organization that we look at how to get the most out of people, okay? And one of the benefits obviously of apprenticeships is that there's not just that there's some structured training delivered by training providers like us, but also learning that apprentices will get through their employer, through newsletters, through going to webinars like this. Some of you might be on an apprenticeship learning about this now, for all I know. It can be any type of learning, but it's about how that learning is embedded in the workplace. And if you flick through, Joe, the most important element of an apprenticeship, therefore, is the 80%. Okay, so if you think of the whole picture, that whole circle, okay, the majority of an apprenticeship is owned or led by the employer. Okay, we as training providers cannot influence what the apprentices that we support get up to at the workplace, the opportunities that they have. And so the involvement of that employer to understand their role in facilitating those opportunities to show off and demonstrate the competence and the standard is super, super important. Okay, if you flick through, Joe, the message really that I've got is not to think about the 20% too much. Understand that it's there, understand what it means, but realize that apprenticeships are 100% of somebody's time. Like I said in the previous slide, they are a job with some training to help you get better at that job. So when your team are doing this, the focus has to be on the whole thing, what they're learning and the value of that. And obviously, Ian will talk about the benefits of CIPD and things like that, but it's how that is embedded into how people go about their job and do their job. Okay, just going to take a sip of water. Are there just any questions people can on that people might want to ask while I take a little sip? Obviously, we've got time for questions at the end. Okay, I'm going to talk about line managers now. So we're going to flick through, Joe, and in this slide here, just do flick areas. There's a little graphic. This guy's looking pretty grumpy because he doesn't have time to support apprentices. He gets that, so he's understands that the previous slide and all that makeup. Just don't have time to do it. Okay, and so we did a bit of internal sort of straw poll in our business. This is not sort of qualified research. Okay, this is more of my opinion really on one of the thought processes that people might have when addressing some of the challenges, certainly some of the value of apprenticeships and thinking about it as you embed it into your organization. So this is what I think typical employees of staff, line managers, certainly probably true of me, do in their time. So Joe, if you flick through, we reckon they spend about 60% of their time doing stuff that they do, but that someone else could do or should do, if you like. Okay, so, and then above that, they spend 30% of their time doing stuff that only they should do, and they're okay to do that. And then at the very top, the sexy stuff, right? Innovating, coming up with new ideas, leading. Okay. And the reason I frame this is because I think there's a missed opportunity for some people who just don't look broader than, oh, I can't lose somebody a day a week, okay, and think just only at that 20%. So if you flick through, Joe, my opinion is that, and remembering the importance of allowing learners, apprentices, to get exposure to the job that perhaps they're not already doing, but to get involved in other things and learn new stuff and new skills and show off, is that a lot of that 60%, okay, is like gold dust for an apprentice in their apprenticeship. Okay, I'm just a bit of personal reflection in my team at the moment. So I had a bit of a breakthrough, I don't know, 2 or 3 months ago, because I'm battling really at the moment with not a huge team, but lots of new people in my team. Okay, and in terms of the drain on my time, and I have this little matrix in my head when a task comes through to me, and I think, right, can somebody else do that, and should somebody else do that? And it's a way of me delegating. And oftentimes people get sucked into it. It'll just, I might as well do it myself because I'll get that done quicker than if I teach somebody else how to do that. And I've had a word with myself basically to say that that's not really the right approach in the long term for my team. So if there's a scenario where somebody should be doing something but can't do it because they don't know how, that's where L&D comes in. Okay, now my team aren't necessarily doing apprenticeships, so there's a reason why they couldn't, but that's where the investment in L&D comes. And I think, and the benefit of that is freeing up, not just in motivating your staff and getting them involved in new things and building their own capability and motivation and things like that, but it does free up other managers' time. And I'm actually starting to see the benefit of that. My team are a bit more motivated than they were. I'm actually getting more stuff done of the things that I would like to be doing, that 30% and that 10%, because of that approach. So that investment in L&D and apprenticeships, I think, is a really important thing. I think there's a last bit at the end. So that's sort of some framing, it's just like a personal opinion or experience. Okay, and Joe, if you could just flick through to the end there. Okay, so I do really think that apprenticeships can empower learners and free up space for line managers. Okay, so just, I've no slides for this last bit, so it's just really about the why of apprenticeships. So I think where apprenticeships go wrong, for me, or have gone wrong, is the motivation at the start of that. So if apprenticeships are done purely because I just want a CIPD qualification and we don't have cash to pay for it, okay, that's where they go wrong. Okay, just to be really honest, there's no doubt of the value of CIPD qualifications that are included in certainly in apprenticeships that Avado delivers, not necessarily all of them, but most training providers will include a CIPD qualification within an HR apprenticeship, but it can't be the only motivation, okay? Learners have to understand how they're going to develop in their job, they have to want to develop in their job, and line managers have to see, and the organization as a whole has to see the value in people working differently and achieving those new standards, okay? So I think it just can't be driven by cash, can't be driven by the qualification in its own, and it has to be right for the individual. And my challenge is to you guys as employers is where funding is an issue, then make it happen. Okay, if you've got somebody that you want to invest in, you can't invest in, the apprenticeship levy is there, but only when done correctly and properly, and that's through having that structured development pathway and those opportunities in the workplace for people to get involved in, and that 80% of their apprenticeship to be fully supported by line managers. Okay, that's it from me. I'm not going to talk too much, so we've got time for questions at the end, and I touched obviously a bit on the CIPD qualifications there, and that's where we'll sort of pass over to Ian, I expect, unless Nikki wanted to come in before we do that.
Just thanks to you, Simon, and as Simon said, if you have got questions on the back of his presentation, please feel free to put them in the chat or just hold on to them till we open up for Q&A. So I'll hand over to Ian now. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Nikki. And hi, everybody. Yeah, great to talk to you about this next aspect where I'm going to talk a little bit about the CIPD profession map and why we think that's so important, but also in a similar way with Simon start a little bit off as the why beforehand. Got a little bit of a quote on the first page. Please don't look into the fact it's an Israeli spy who gave this quote, but I think it links very much into what Simon was saying about the apprenticeships. Without continuous personal development, you are now all that you will ever be. And I think this aspect of really creating a culture within HR of continuous professional development is something really that should be at the heart of our strategy of what we're trying to do. So if we move on, so Joe, if we have the next slide, please. I've selected this picture because I think it really represents where HR is at the moment, on a particular journey that's largely been created by the pandemic. If we look to the left of the person here, we can look back over the last year. And really, I think it's important picking up on what Nikki said at the beginning to say, what a fantastic job that HR has been doing. The way that HR, not just, I mean, particularly in the NHS, but not just in the NHS, if I look at most organisations, HR has really raised its game to respond to situations that we've never experienced before. And whether that's around work practices, employee well-being, whatever it is, HR really has done a great job of responding to that. And you should be very much proud of the hard work and the efforts that you've put in to that over the past year. I think what we're now entering now is a point which is, okay, so what does the future look like? And how do we as HR respond to that, particularly where so much of that is unknown? Okay, there are a lot of views on what the future world of work will be. Some people are saying, we're all going to be, we're only going to be going into the office one day a week, etc., etc. But we don't know whether that's going to be the case. What we do know is that there will be some employers who will adopt flexible working and good working practices and as a result of COVID. Some who will turn around and publicise that they have flexible working, but no doubt will be saying to members of staff, if you want to get on, we expect you to see you in the office. Some companies will just want people to be back in the office. And so, you know, one of the things that is unsure about, well, what will that nature of work look like? You know, we've seen technology come into play very much in the last year. How is that going to accelerate going forward? Where will people work from? And of course, here we've got that distinction between, there are a number of people who are working from home. We see people, you know, we did it just yesterday. We had someone from home running a cookie session for us. We could all dial into and learn how to cook a risotto, which is great. And we're talking about these different flexible working, but what about the people who don't have that option? What about the people who've had to go into work every single day during the pandemic? How do we make sure that when we go forward, those are not left behind, that we're looking for people who can have that flexibility? What about for the people who can't? So these are really key aspects. So where will work take place? What will work look like? And all these questions are things that HR needs to be able to have a voice on, and that voice needs to be evidence-based, data-led, and it needs to be about insight. So we're at the heart of the conversation going forward. So one of the key things we need to be asking ourselves right now is, where we're sitting in the middle of this picture, going on that right-hand side of the journey into the future, how well prepared are we for that? Do we have the capability for that? And this is where we're seeing as a profession, a lot of companies are now coming to us and asking the question about, we want to be seen as a professional function within our organisation. We're having this conversation with Pranar, and it's just many organisations doing it. We've if we look at across the civil service, Rupert McNeil is very, very keen on this aspect. And if we put it into the sort of like an NHS concept, it's this aspect of, nobody would want to put themselves into the hands of a clinician who doesn't have a qualification. Okay, nobody would expect anyone to have a clinician to have that qualification that is being to a certain level that we know they're a professional. Yet often in HR, we send people out into the organisation who impact on people in very dramatic ways every single day by the policies, procedures, the way we operate, that we're not always asking that they have a profession in the same way we might with someone in finance or in marketing, etc. And this is the shift that we're looking to get to. How do we make sure that HR really is seen as a profession, not just for people entering it, so from a career pathway, but within the organisation, they say, yes, we can see that HR, they really add value because their people are highly skilled, highly trained, and perceived as professionals. Yeah, and this is looking at a whole number of ways. I understand we've got a number of people here from things like workforce planning, resourcing. I mean, we're seeing a huge drive on how do we raise the capability of our strategic workforce planning professional practitioners. How do we really get them to a high level? How do we raise the importance of things like HR analytics, so that we're not just getting data and better data, but we're really raising the level of conversation that we're having with the business, so that we add real value when we're talking about data in our conversations. So a really important time for HR going forward. And if we look at the CIPD, what are we doing to try to help this? Well, one of the things we're doing is trying to define what does good HR look like. So Joe, can go on to the next slide. Most of you will have seen this. If you haven't seen this, this is what we call our new profession map. But actually, it's been around since the 2018. But it has been a shift away from the previous profession map that we had before. But what we're doing here, we have core knowledge areas, we have core behaviour areas, and then we have specialist knowledge areas built around a core purpose and key activities, which I'll come on to at the moment. But if we look at this, this is really just helping, well, it's for us, what we've done here, we've defined what good HR looks like. It's not just a CIPD, in the smoke-filled room. It's sort of 30,000 of our members, academics, corporate leaders who have contributed to this. And I think the shift that we're seeing with this is, if there was a fault that the CIPD had with our previous profession, Matt, is that it was a static thing. We created it back in 2012, but there was very little change to it for nearly 6 years. This isn't the case with this one. This one will be updated each year. So at the moment, we've just undertaken a review. Those reviews are now going to be quarterly, where we look at what major changes have occurred. So if we think about the last year, things like flexible working is a key one. Things like inclusion, diversity is another key one. We're looking at how have they impacted what we're saying in terms of standards in these areas, and what changes do we need to make. So one of the things you'll see going forward is regular updates to the profession map and what it's saying and the standards within there. Why is that useful? Why is that important? Well, one of the things that we're more involved in is on a large scale. So if we look at, again, we're doing this across the civil service, we're doing this with large companies like the United Nations, we're doing this with Shell, for example. They're asking us to help them define what good likes within their space, within their organisation. So we're using the profession map as a blueprint for them to create their own version of this. So they're aligning their own competency frameworks to our standards. But the great thing is now what we can say to them is, what you won't have to do is worry about updating that. As we update the profession map, we'll send you that new information, what that's meant for changes, so you can then cascade those changes into their own competency framework. So what we're saying is that what good looks like becomes a naturally evolving process within an organizational context. How does can we now turn on to the next screen, please, Joe? So how do we actually use this then at an individual level? Well, one of the things is that this is designed to do is help individuals manage their career. So what you can do is, the first thing you do is you can look at, from these descriptions, where does my work sit? Where, you know, what type of activities do I tend to get involved in? And again, the main change here from the previous profession map is where we just had band numbers. We've aligned most of this to our professional membership levels. So you can see if you're an associate, what do you need to have, if you're a chartered member, if you're a chartered fellow. And so one of the things is, what you can do is you can start to identify, where am I? And then you can ask yourself, if I want to progress up the hierarchy, for use of better words, so if I want to go to the next level, what do I need to do? Or also, if I'm happy at my level, but I either want to move from a specialist into a more generalist role, or a generalist into a more specialist role, what sorts of things do I need to be able to do? Do I need to be able to learn? And so one of the things that we do here is, if we turn on to the next slide, is we have this. So if this is an example, I use this because it's just such an important topic for the moment, is analytics and creating value. And so what you can start to see is, you can start to see exactly what is it that I'm supposed to be able to do. So this is from, or I'm supposed to be able to know. So this is from our core knowledge, and we'd have a core behavior as well. What am I supposed to know? What am I supposed to be able to do? And within that do, we talk about what impact you need to have within the organization. And am I there? If I'm not there, what do I need to do in terms of development? And of course, at that point, you know, depending upon where I am in my career, this is where an apprenticeship might come into play, because it might be that apprenticeship. If I'm I'm moving into, say, let's say, a HR BP role, which we would normally see at a chartered member level, if actually I don't have those skills yet, I'm just moving up into it. It's a development role for me. It may well be that we've got some kind of apprenticeship that would actually give me the sound basis of capability and knowledge to be effective in that role. And this is the type of thing which we're encouraging people to do. We are developing new tools which will come out later in this year, where people, particularly members, will have the capability to be able to move, to plot where they are on an online tool, say where they want to get to, and then it will actually give them advice in terms of how they can bridge that gap between the two. We've got something called My CPD Map at the moment, but that's going to be enhanced to be more effective. And again, what we're doing, can that include OD apprenticeships too, please? We'll cover that at the moment. One of the things that we will look to do is work with organisations, if people want this on an organisational lens, to how can we help you create career pathways. There's I think there's really interesting conversation around the fact that your brand is so high at the moment, is so strong with all the work that you're doing. It's a great time to bring fresh talent into the HR profession, but the challenge is people will only stay if they see career pathways, clear development pathways and career pathways that they can go on. And what the profession map does, we've done this with the civil service. The civil service have a career pathway. If you want to move across, particularly for the HR function, anywhere you want to move across within that. And our profession map really threads all the way through that. It forms the DNA of that career pathway. And we've done that, so across the whole of the civil service. We're doing it with Shell as an example. And these are some of the things that we can do, work with organisations to make this come alive and help have those clear career pathways for people going forward. So that's an example of how it might work. And then Joe, just onto the last slide, please. And this is really just a point which is at the core of the profession map. And really, if we look at our purpose is to create better work and working lives. And that's one of the reasons why I work for the CIPD, because I love that aspect. Then we've got these three areas around it, which are that we need to be principles led, and that is that work matters. It is the responsibility of every organisation to provide purposeful and meaningful and safe and inclusive work for people. That people matter, that people have a voice, people feel they can have an impact, people feel engaged. And if you look at those two areas, really it's quite interesting because they're not HR. Those are organisational issues. Where HR really comes into play is professionalisation matters. How well can we lead the debate around those first two factors, those first two principles? How well do we lead the debate around work matters and people matters? Okay, and do we have the capability to do that? Evidence-based approach within here. So we're talking about things such as how good is our knowledge about behavioural science and academic research. To what extent do we bring that into our thinking? How good is our organisational data? How well are we able to bring insights to appease stakeholder concerns? To what extent do we involve stakeholder concerns in our decisions? And then to what extent is our practitioner, do we have real expertise in a certain field so we can bring really good insight? And then finally, to what extent are we outcomes driven? When we think about our outcomes, do we think about our impact on work? Do we think about our impact on people? Do we think about our impact on our professionalism? And do we think about our impact on us as individuals? How professional am I? To what extent do I consider myself a HR professional? So all these things are areas that we're discussing, and the great thing from the apprenticeship perspective is it gives a great vehicle at level 3, level 5 and level 7. So really at key stages of people's careers to actually get that knowledge, that experience, but also that recognition of that professionalism. So that's it from me. So if we now hand back to you, Nikki, for open up some questions.
Thanks, Ian. If it's okay, I'm going to go straight to the sort of latest in the chat from Jane Woods. I don't know, Jane, if you want to come in and just explain. Hi, Jane, and share what you're looking for, and then we'll go to Simon and Ian to respond. I think it's a really good question.
Yeah, sure. So I've got a great number of my team at the moment, either on the level 3 or the level 5 apprenticeship programme. And we also support people in my team to upgrade either to chartered member or chartered fellow, either through the assessment route, or if they're already a member, going to fellow through the telephone route. And I think we must have 10 or 12 people, which is a considerable number really of my team going through those processes at the moment. What we are looking for as well is for people who want to get a level 7 qualification. And so far, we've rather than just going through the assessment route and getting the membership, they would like the extra knowledge and underpinning knowledge that comes with level 7. We don't have any money as a trust to support that. I don't know if you were on the call, Nikki, last week, but we were on the Northwest HRD call, and we were doing some of that feedback through the Ernst & Young the process that we've been going through around what HR and OD needs as a profession. And we started to get a little bit angsty, I suppose, because I don't think anything that's come back out of those 8 pieces really tells us what we need as a profession. It kind of implies that we need further development to become world-class HR and OD professionals. I believe I have a team of world-class HR and OD professionals, and I actually believe that the universities and the CIPD have both academic and professional frameworks for us, the map and everything else, that already tells us how we further develop. We just don't have the money to do it. So I'd like for the HR and OD profession, we were talking about kind of the digital agenda and all of that. I would like more money invested there so we can use that information to actually take ourselves forward and not just kind of constantly report on what happened last month. I was here last month, I know what happened. I need to know what's going to happen next. Now we plan for that. So that piece of work aside, what I would really like from CIPD and from the apprenticeship standards is a level 7 programme, but also something that we've got OD professionals. HR and OD are seeing themselves in 2 very different camps in some ways. And we've got OD professionals who don't see the CIPD as a route for them. And there's either something missing in our standards there, or maybe we need to look at a different route for OD professionals. But I would like, if we continue to talk about OD being a key part of HR or the people profession as a whole, why don't we start to include that more and embed it into the standards and into the training and things that we're doing? So that's
wow, thanks, Jane. I love angst. And I would draw some similarities to what you've said. That's why HPM are heavily involved in and we've put forward, myself and Dean, the need for investment in the profession. So and we are getting positive vibes from that, so fingers crossed. So I'll go to Simon first to answer that question around level 7.
So Jane, really interesting discussion topic actually, and I think the OD thing links to, I had saying to Nikki, I had a call with Paul Wallace from NHS employers the other week, and we were talking about the reset button post-COVID and all of that. And I think the sort of the people impact of this and how on earth we're going to get out of this when our people are just so exhausted and all of that. And so OD plays a massive role in that recovery process. So I could talk about that for a long time, but just on the level 7 point. So the level 7 apprenticeship it is approved. So people who don't know that, it is there and approved. I hadn't been for a long time, and then earlier this year, there it came. Now, I speak from a training provider's point of view, and a couple of things that doesn't mean that straight away training providers can, right, here we go, here it is, because you have to build a curriculum and a framework and the stuff that you need behind the scenes as a training provider to be able to bring a reasonably a good product to market. And I think I don't mind sharing that our business in the past has rushed products out because of employer demand, and we've had to change them as we go rather than just take time and drip feed things out. So I think I wouldn't be it's here now, which is great, but I wouldn't be scrabbling to get started like really quickly. So, and the other reason I wouldn't do that is because the challenge with the level 7, and I'm having this conversation with a number of large central government departments is that where people have previously had graduate schemes where they just throw people on a level 7 course, they're, oh, we're just going to do this through the levy now. But the job roles, it's senior people professional apprenticeship, okay, and the people doing that have to be in those roles over a sustained period of time to be able to evidence that, and that is just the way apprenticeships work. You know what I mean? And that's the challenge, I guess, for your team is that, well, I've got like 12 HR directors here, you know. So, and so it's that that is the challenge. So it's not that's the biggest challenge, and I don't know what the answer is, by the way. So don't ask me the answer, for employers to harness the apprenticeship levy if funding is a thing at that level 7. Level 7 is definitely the hardest level to do that, not just because it's new, but because the higher up you get, the smaller the funnel will get in people doing those roles, if you like. So that's my counsel on the level 7 program. Not rush to think, right, this is what we're going to throw people at. Got to have the job roles to match to it. And then OD, I mean, just your point about OD, I actually not a subject matter expertise of mine in terms of OD apprenticeships. I've looked, there's a career development professional apprenticeship at level 6. It's not something that our business does, and whether that's, I don't know if you're referring to any particular standards, and it doesn't seem to quite be right. But the challenge, and one of the reasons, I guess, for the delay of the HR level 7 apprenticeship was one of the responsibilities of an employer group when they're writing an apprenticeship standard is to show that it's inherently different to something that's already there. You know what I mean? And so when you look at this sort of level 7 leadership and management apprenticeships and other things like that, the challenge for that employer group was to show, right, why is this different to that substantially, that it needs to exist in its own right? And I guess in the development of an OD apprenticeship, that might be the challenge to make that happen as a trailblazer group. The other option then is to think about how employers or groups of employers can work with training providers to look at sort of co-investment models to sort of customize apprenticeship training programs that have a bigger emphasis on the sort of content that you want that might not be on the sort of off-the-shelf program. And you mentioned EY there. I do think there is a weakness in the civil services. This is me as a very responsible member of that supplier community, slagging it off. But I think there's a slight weakness in it at the moment. Structured L&D sort of frameworks don't talk to apprenticeship frameworks in terms of procurement routes. And so the NHS can find a way where you can get sort of L&D frameworks to talk to apprenticeship frameworks and combine the two in some way. That might be a way to unlock some of that sort of funding challenges.
Okay, Jane, do you want to come back on that?
Yeah, just I mean, first of all, we do have a whole load of very senior, very long-standing members of staff who are chomping at the bit to go on to the level 7.
Great.
But secondly, in terms of the current framework, I can see what you're saying. Before you start developing a completely separate framework, there needs to be a real need for that. But when I've spoken to people about doing the CIPD, I've got heads of service across workforce wellbeing, across people information, OD, resourcing, who all think it's an HR function or an HR qualification, and it isn't. You know, we still, you know, it's still personnel and development. Why is it not people and development or something now? You know, the CIPD. Why are we not sort of moving with the times and let them know that this is a people profession or an HR profession, and letting them see themselves as part of that qualification, because currently they don't see their role in it or in the standards.
Well, and the interesting thing on that, I think, is the title of the standard, right? So the level 3 and level 5, HR support, HR consultant. The level 7, people professional. HR is not in it. So I would point that out and reference, you know, and reinforce that message that, yeah, the standard reflects that.
Yeah, and I mean, some really good points there, Jane. And just on the CIPD, Chartered Institute for Personnel and Development, I'll be honest with you, this is something we've argued for many years. The likelihood is, and if you look at our website now, actually, we very rarely use the term Chartered Institute anymore. So what we talk about is the CIPD, that's our brand name. And if you look at our website and if you look at Profession Map, we talk about people practice rather than HR and things like that. So that's the direction of travel that we are going in. I think that you know, a couple of things just to sort of from my perspective. One of the things I sometimes think we need to make sure we separate out, which isn't always as clearly defined as it possibly could be, is there is a difference between the apprenticeships are not CIPD apprenticeships. The apprenticeships are, you know, an apprenticeship which many of them, although only the level 5 HR is it built into, but many of them have CIPD qualifications. The apprenticeship providers put that in because the qualification covers the standards.
Yeah.
The really great thing about where we are with the new apprenticeship is that coincided with the new level 7 qualification. The question will be for the apprenticeship providers, are they satisfied that the level 7 qualification will meet all the standards so they can just build the qualification into the new apprenticeship? And that's really what we're just waiting to hear. And as soon as that decision is made, we would then start to see that then being cascaded out. And of course, at that level 7 aspect, that often disconnect there is between HR and OD, I think is not so much of an issue because of the nature of the type of learning activities and the standards within there. I think it'd be relevant to anybody in an OD role or HR role. But I do think that you raise an interesting point, which is, you know, this aspect of some OD professionals don't engage with the CIPD because they don't necessarily feel that the CIPD is relevant to them. And that's a debate that we've been having for a while in discussion. I think part of the challenge you have is, and these are varied discussions, where do you see the future of HR? Some people with increased technology would see more and more of the people profession being more of an OD type space. With technology, they take up a lot of some of the stuff behind. But that's just, there are different views in that space. What I can say to you is that we are looking at the profession map around, do we need to make OD more explicit, more detailed than it is at the moment? But what we're also doing, and this is just something that we are looking at, is outside of the qualification, because we're not planning to do a qualification in OD against the people profession. What we are looking at is a range of programs where we're calling them accredited practitioner. So those will be they will be aimed at postgraduate level thinking. So that level 7 thinking, they'll be largely self-directed, digital, online, but within an organizational context, we would make it blended. So there would be discussion points, key areas where people get together either like this or face-to-face, if that's possible. And then people will come out, they will last about 6 months, 6 to 8 months, and then people will come out with a CIPD accredited practitioner in, and we're looking at OD, strategic workforce planning, we're looking at analytics, the HRBP role. So that's a completely different way of raising the capability at a senior level, and then giving some kind of different badging qualification type thing to it. So that's something that's coming down the line. And you'll start to see that later on this year.
Okay, thanks, Ian. I'm going to move to a question that's in the chat from Will. Will, do you want to come in and ask your question?
Yeah, can do. Thanks, Nikki. Yeah, it was just really interesting what you were saying, Ian, about some of the work in the civil service, UN, Shell, and I think you mentioned that that creation almost of a competency framework for the NHS is something you'd be happy to help with. And I just wondered, with the big conversation and the work nationally, if that's already on the agenda, or if you see that as a development off the back of that work that's being done currently.
It's a bit of both. So we're already talking about it, but we see that sort of falling on the back of coming out of the EY work that's going on at the moment. Obviously, you know, it would make sense if for the whole of the NHS you had a set of consistent standards of what good looks like for people practitioners. That would be a sensible thing to do, and so that we could see. We would want to see that happening. One of the things that we're talking, and this is at a very senior level, but if we give a comparison of what we've done within the civil service, we have a memorandum of understanding, and that memorandum of understanding is based about how do we, with the civil service, work to professionalise the people profession across the civil service. And so examples where we've done that across the civil service are things like the career pathways. Okay, but what we also recognise, whilst we can do things at a national level, there are unique things within each trust and things like that that we need to be looking at. So if I look at some of the things within the civil service, what we have is, whilst we have, we're working on a consistent set of standards, what we do is with each organisation, and if we put this into an NHS level, we could either do this regionally or by big trusts, and then looking at grouping smaller trusts together, is we have an award now called People Development Partner, and that's an organisational award. And what that says is, so if we look at a large trust, that would say for a large trust, we are recognising the fact that you are committed to developing your people profession, okay? And the way that you're doing that is really in sort of 5 areas. Number one is you're defining what good HR looks like. So you have a clear definition aligned to the CIPD as your professional body of what good looks like and how you define that. And then you then assess your people against that. So there's some way of knowing that. How do we know how people are doing against those standards? You have routes of bringing people into the profession, the apprenticeship being a key one, but also you have ways of making sure that you are raising the professional standard of HR. So that could be, Jane's already mentioned, upgrading and experience assessment, qualifications, this new accredited practitioner. You'll have a commitment to continuous professional development. So how does that look? So how do you make sure people who aren't going through qualifications, apprenticeships, they're still developing themselves? And finally, there would be an aspect of giving back to the wider profession. So, you know, that's being involved in research and policy work and that type of thing. And where organisations meet that, then they get this award. So if we look at companies that have done that, the first one was Tesco's. We actually built this as a request from Tesco's originally. Since then, Network Rail have recently become a PDP. An Irish utilities company have become it, first one in Ireland. The MOD, DWP, Civil Service HR, the Home Office are working towards it, HMRC. So all these organisations are getting this branding that says we are committed to developing our people on an ongoing basis. So that's something which we see. And when Tesco's went live, when we mentioned that Tesco's had got this award, within 24 hours we had 175 companies say, "How do I get this?" And interestingly, one of the first people to also come back to us was Rupert McNeil saying, "This needs to be across the civil service."
Thanks.
So I think that, and these are the conversations we are having at a senior level within the NHS, although they are very early days at the moment still.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. And on the back of that, obviously HPMA are involved in some of those conversations, and we do have, HPMA has a HR competency framework, has had it in place for some time, and we have mapped it to the CIPD profession map, and we are sharing that this afternoon with a guy from the CIPD, just to make sure that we're not reinventing the wheel and we can build perhaps on something we've already
and that's a great example of the partnership relationship that, particularly with the CPMA and the CIPD, that we're working together so that we're not contradicting one another in this type of space, that it's all aligned.
Yes, yeah, so watch this space, Will, watch this space. Gosh, right, okay, I'm conscious of time. There's quite a few comments in the chat around the level 7, which you may just want to look at, and Simon shared the level 7 link to you all and request from Jane, so that's good. So there's some discussion about the level 7 and which roles it is aligned to. So I don't know, Simon, you've put a comment back. Do you want to just pick that up, or? You're on mute, so don't forget to take off mute.
I'm just doing that. My trackpad failed there. Yeah, no, Lucy just made a point about level 7 being prerequisites in certain roles, and my argument to that really is I understand why they are. When you reach a certain level, there's quite a big salary band there between 40 and 100,000, right? But you know what, it can be used as an incentive, as a sort of development pipeline, perhaps into those roles for other people, rather than saying, no, to get this job you must have this qualification. If you're thinking in the context of apprenticeships, where you have to be doing the job to be able to achieve the qualification, then it's about giving people the chance to sort of have a stab at those jobs and develop into them, rather than be the finished article before you give them that job. You know, so that would be my view on that, in terms of how you're thinking about how you position level 7 apprenticeships into that development strategy, and mapping it to roles and things like that.
Thanks, Simon. So there's a couple of comments as people were sort of logging in around how organisations are using it to manage their talent in HR, and also around Vicky WWL is asking about routes for HR development and how we can incorporate. So really we mentioned, didn't we, about the impact of COVID has been positive for the NHS as an employer brand, but we're likely, I think the latest is that we're likely to lose staff through attrition because of COVID as well. However, there are more applications for nursing degrees and other qualifications than there has been before. So from a HR point of view, I think it was you, Simon, or Ian mentioned about being attractive to attract new blood into the workforce profession, the people profession, rather than let's just talk about HR. So there's some comments there about people wanting to know a bit more about, you know, and others on the call may have how they've utilised it in their own organisations. But how about how you manage talent using apprenticeships, how you develop your profession using apprenticeships, and what routes there are. So I don't know who wants to pick that up, and whether there's any people in the audience who have got experience of doing that and can share it with the group. That would be good. So Simon, do you want to come back on the talent management piece?
Yeah, I mean, so it was me that sort of mentioned that about the NHS, the strength of the brand at the moment. You know, people, I said before we started, just like people literally clapping a brand on their doorsteps. You know, there's never been a more powerful moment to fly the NHS flag. But I think the journey that we've been on from it as a training provider with employers is that education piece around, and everybody, I can tell everybody this knows that, right? Well, I can use apprenticeships for my existing staff. People get that now. And I just wonder, it's not to lose the value of that, but I just wonder if there's been a bit of a loss of the impact that apprenticeships can have on talent and quality and diversity in the workplace, and youth thought and energy and things like that. So, you know, nobody will disagree that HR is across all organisations, not just the NHS, has the pivotal role to play in that reset button that I talk about. And so thinking about how you can harness, you know, structured and they're not free. The apprenticeship levy isn't free money, but you know what I mean, not sort of cash money from the bottom line to build development opportunities for people into that is really, really exciting, I think.
I mean, from my perspective on that, you know, I think it's fair to say, and not all companies, but a number of companies that I worked with when the apprenticeships first came out, the conversation was, Ian, this is a tax that's been levied on us. We're going to draw down on as much of that tax as possible. So we're just going to throw people at apprenticeships, so we can give them,
not literally,
yeah, exactly, but give them some free training. And of course, part of the problem that rose for some companies, and one I could think of in particular, was they had a number of difficulties because the conversations were coming back saying, people on the apprenticeship saying, I'm struggling with the apprenticeship because I'm having to do the apprenticeship and my day job. And then we've got the conversation, well, no, actually, your day job is an apprenticeship. It's not additional to that. If you're on an apprenticeship, that's what, because of the nature of the 80% on the job, etc., etc. And so where we've seen a shift is where the apprenticeship is really built into a strategic view of what is our career pathways, what do we want to offer our people professionals within the organisation, and how do we build that in from people we're trying to bring in new, so at a very early start, okay, to people who may be shifting career partway through. I'm speaking to an organisation at the moment which has got a number of people who have moved into HR, quite a senior position, but have never had any HR experience before. So what can we do for them to actually bring their skills aligned? And you know, there's almost the aspect of, you know, to what extent could you have somebody coming from fresh to the people profession and work all the way through to a senior management, and all of that being on an apprenticeship pathway? You know, I mean, that could be something that you could look at. So for me, it is that case of the organisations now really seeing this as, okay, rather than just draw down on the levy, where do we start to use this in a strategic way? What are the career pathways we want to offer our people practitioners? And then how does the apprenticeship support that? Recognising that's just one way of a number of different ways in which we can provide people with meaningful careers.
Great, thanks, Ian. So any cracks? I think we've covered most of the things in the chat, but if anybody feels we've not covered their point, then please put your hand up to come back in. But any other sort of questions for Simon, Ian, or indeed myself around this topic, or anything else, if you like? You're very quiet and very camera shy. I'm not used to it. No more questions? So I suppose it's the thing that's in my mind, Ian, is how HPMA potentially become a people development partner.
Well, I think Nikki, that's the conversation that we need to be entering into, because I think you're absolutely right. And I think because what that does, it sets the tone for, you know, first of all, the partnership aspect, but also this point of an ongoing commitment to professional development. What does that actually mean, both a strategic and cultural level for every single trust within the NHS, and what do we need to be thinking about to align to that? Because, you know, I'll be honest with you, for too long, HR has been cobbler's children. You know, we've spent so much time working with the businesses we work in to develop them. We haven't spent enough time on what do we need to be doing, and what does a professional HR person or people professional, I should say, look like, and not just now, but picking up on James' point, in the future. So what will that people profession look like, and what some of the roles that we might have now, particularly with technology, we may not need those anymore, but we're going to need a lot more capability in that OD type space, in that strategic workforce planning space. You know, and we're going to have much better data than we've got before, we've had before, and we have to start committing now to what does that mean in terms of what we say about ourselves, our profession, the value we add. I think one thing I'll leave you with on this, when I work with organisations, I do an exercise quite regularly, and I get people to say, write down on a post-it note, either virtually or in real life, face to face, when people in your organisation think HR, what words do they use to describe HR? Okay. And without exception, most of those words are things like support, okay, reactive, police, friendly, you know, the computer says no. Very rarely do I get strategic, enabling, yeah, proactive. And I think that we need to look at ourselves and say, why is it that people have this view of us? What do we need to do to actually change that? How do we need to be different? And I think a strategy of HR professionalization, of raising those standards for everybody and having clear pathways and clear development strategies, with the apprenticeship being at the heart of that, I think is key.
Right, thank you. So that's something we need to perhaps pick up on, how we work through that approach. Just picking up on digital, so myself and Dean and the vice presidents of HPMA have fed back to Tom, the chief people HR and OD, officer. Interesting, his title as well, not people, but anyway, about the need for digital. And it's just a comment that Jane's made around, it's not about yes, it's about digital platforms, how we utilize the data, etc., but it's more about the impact of robotics, the impact of automation. Who knows what sort of technology we'll have, and like Jane said, roles that don't even exist yet. So there's a lot to think about in that space, and we fed that back in to the review around that, and its importance, because we as workforce professionals need some education in some of that, because I think it's a bit of an area of gap in knowledge. Okay, any other questions from anyone? And I will send a link to the competency framework. I'll send it to everybody that's on the call today. So I can't do it yet because I'm trying to chair. See, you're just illustrating the point that workforce professionals are very shy, retiring, don't shout from the front. And if you think about our finance colleagues, they're very good at their profession and having qualifications linked to their career pathway. And I know, just picking up on another point, Praenor is very interested in the career framework pathway that the civil service do have, which is, you can get it if you go on and Google it. So I think there will be a more prescriptive, picking up Will's point, a more prescriptive pathway. But because the NHS is so complex, it's how you factor in all elements of what could be in there. So that's again on it's something that they're looking at nationally as part of the review. So Jane says she talks too much. No, you talk enough, love. So any other final comments? Have we covered the points you wanted to make? I know Vicky, you put a few things in the chat. Have we covered everything you wanted from this, or are there any other questions you want?
No, I think you've covered most for me. I think it just gives me an opportunity to think about, I don't think in the last year we've even had time to think about the team and their aspirations and where they fit in terms of the level 7 and where they want to progress. And I think it's triggering in me to have those conversations about, let's just have an understanding of where you all are and what your aspirations are and how we can link that to an apprentice pathway. Yeah. So it's given me a lot to think about.
Good, thanks. Simon's just put in the link to the civil service HR career framework. He's obviously got too much time on his hands.
I'm just looking forward to the webinar about RPA with Jane and yourself. That'll be a good discussion, that one. Yeah.
Okay, any final questions before we close off about anything?
No, just to say thank you, everybody, and thanks, Joe, for doing all the stuff behind the scenes in the engine room and getting the invitations out and links and making this happen. Doesn't happen without that. So thanks to you, Joe.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody. We really enjoyed today's session. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone, for taking really valuable time out of your day, because I know you're all really, really busy. So, and again, I thank you for everything that you're doing. Please keep a lookout on the website in our newsletter for future events. We're doing a number of great things. We do have a session, Joe will remind me, with the sumo guy, which hopefully you've seen in April. And it's really a gift from us back to you in terms of everything that you've done. So you'll have some takeaways on resilience that you can apply to every aspect of your life, not just work. So look out for him. He's always really, really good. So great. Thanks very much. Keep the good fight, as they say. But thanks very much for joining us this morning. I'll speak to you again soon. Bye for now.
Take care. Stay safe and healthy.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Bye, Jane.